The Texas sun burned like judgment. Dust rose around William Carter's worn boots as he walked slowly down the main street of Clearwater, a town that had grown without him. The square, once smelling of corn and gasoline, now buzzed with new cafes, shiny pickup trucks, and young businessmen glued to their phones, all of them looking down on the man in the faded hat and sun-stained clothes. William stepped into the farm supply store, holding his hat respectfully in his hands. He only needed a small part, a belt for his water pump, but the way the clerk looked at him made the air heavier. "Do you even have money for that, old man?" The clerk sneered. Two younger guys, caps turned backward, turned around to watch. William gave a faint smile, the kind that tries to hide pain, and laid a crumpled bill on the counter. "This should cover it." The clerk raised his eyebrows. "No card? Man living off the grid must be tough these days." Laughter filled the store. At the back, Sarah, the new manager, dressed sharply, watched in silence but said nothing. William picked up the part, thanked them, and walked out with his eyes on the ground. Outside, someone muttered loud enough to sting, "Crazy old man, probably lives in a barn somewhere." That comment cut deeper than it should have. He thought about replying but stayed silent. Because years ago, he too had been arrogant. Years ago, he'd forgotten what it felt like to be humiliated. On his way home, he passed by the Copper Mule Tavern. Inside, a group of young businessmen, Brian, Cole, and Mason, were talking loudly about buying old farmland in the area. The Carter Fields, once the pride of the county, was now just another item at auction. "We'll grab that land for pocket change. The old owner, some washed-up dinosaur," Brian laughed, raising his beer. William heard it from the sidewalk. The name of that farm still hurt. The land his father had built with his bare hands was now a punchline. He took a deep breath and kept walking, but inside him, something stirred. An old wound reopened. Back at his small rented ranch, the evening light filtered through broken blinds. Everything was simple there: a rocking chair, old tools, and a wall covered with memories. Among them, a faded photograph of his father holding a plough. On the back, written in trembling handwriting, "Never let pride blind your purpose." William ran his thumb over the words, feeling the paper almost crumble. He spoke softly, as if his father could still hear him. "I tried, Dad, but I lost everything." That night, the radio crackled on the wooden table. The announcer's voice mentioned that Carter Fields would officially be auctioned off at the end of the week. The sound of that name filled the room. William looked up. It wasn't just land, it was his destiny. He poured himself a cup of cold coffee and looked out the window. The moonlight shimmered over the abandoned fences of the property that had once been his pride. And right there, alone, with grease-stained hands and a heart covered in dust, William made a silent promise. "They'll remember who built this land, even if I have to start from nothing." The next morning, William woke before sunrise. He put on the same worn shirt, laced his boots, and went out to the old barn. In the corner, covered by a tarp, sat the old blue tractor he and his father had rebuilt decades ago. He turned the key, the engine coughed, sputtered, and died. William chuckled softly. "Guess we both got old, partner." But before he could try again, he heard tires crunching on the gravel road. A white pickup stopped at his gate. Two men stepped out with clipboards. The taller one spoke. "Mr. William Carter, we're here on behalf of the bank. You're being served. The property will be repossessed in 48 hours. William didn't move. The men got back in their truck and drove off, leaving a trail of dust behind. The camera closes in on his face. The wind lifts his hat. He holds it firmly, eyes fixed on the horizon. Silence. Only the sound of the engine fading away down the empty Texas road. In Destined, the next day began with a sound that used to define Clearwater, the low hum of tractors somewhere beyond the hills. But now it mixed with the noise of construction. New condos, glass storefronts, and paved roads were replacing the old dirt lanes William once knew by heart. He drove his pickup, its paint long faded, toward the town square. The truck coughed and shook at every turn, but it kept moving, like its owner. The Clearwater Farmers Market was in full swing. Families walked with paper cups of coffee, and stalls were lined with organic produce and handmade crafts. The market had changed. The people had changed. But William hadn't. He parked beside a brand-new black Ford F-150. Its owner, a young man in designer boots and a fitted jacket, looked at William as if he were something dragged in from the mud. "Hey, old man, you're leaking oil," he said, smirking. William looked down. A single drop fell from under his truck. He nodded politely. "Yeah, she's old, but she still gets me where I need to go." The young man scoffed, walking away to join a group of friends near the coffee stand. They laughed, loud enough for William to hear. He pretended not to. He wandered through the market, passing stalls selling produce from land that once belonged to him. The same soil, the same smell, different hands. Then he saw a familiar face. Rebecca Lane, the town's agricultural officer. She was checking permits, clipboard in hand, her hair tied neatly behind her head. When she noticed William, her expression softened. "Mr. Carter, I thought you moved away years ago." "I did. Guess I found my way back," he said with a small smile. She looked at him for a moment, then sighed. "Clearwater's not what it used to be. Most of the old farms got bought out by the company from Dallas." "Yeah," William replied, scanning the rows of shiny new signs. "I noticed." Rebecca hesitated before speaking again. "I heard about your property. I'm sorry. The auction's happening fast." William nodded, eyes distant. "Land doesn't belong to us forever. We just borrow it from time." Before Rebecca could answer, the group of young businessmen from the tavern, Brian, Cole, and Mason, walked past, holding iced coffees and laughing. Brian spotted William immediately. "Well, if it isn't the legend himself," he said. "You here to buy back your land, old man?" The crowd around turned quiet. William looked up at them, calm but tired. "I'm here to see what's become of it." Mason chuckled. "What's become of it? It's worth millions now. We're planning to build luxury ranch homes. Maybe we'll name one after you. Carter's Corner. What do you think?" Laughter erupted again. Rebecca's face turned red with anger, but William simply placed his hat back on and said softly, "Names fade. Land doesn't forget who worked it." For a second, the laughter stopped. There was something in his tone, steady, unbothered, that cut through their arrogance. Brian blinked, unsure how to reply, but pride didn't let him back down. "Keep talking like that and maybe someone will believe you still matter." William smiled faintly and turned to Rebecca. "Good to see you again, Rebecca. Take care of the town." He walked away, leaving them standing in silence. Later that afternoon, William stopped at Benny's Gas and Feed, one of the few old places still standing. The bell above the door jingled when he entered. Benny, a man in his 60s with grease-stained hands, looked up from behind the counter. "Well, I'll be damned. William Carter. Thought the city swallowed you whole." "Almost did," William said, half smiling. "Just need a gallon of oil and a favor." Benny wiped his hands on a rag. "For you, anything." William leaned on the counter. "You still know who handles the equipment auctions?" "Yeah," Benny said, narrowing his eyes. "You're not thinking of buying something, are you?" "Not buying, just looking," William replied, but the way he said it made Benny pause. That tone, calm but deliberate, was the sound of a man about to do something impossible. So that night, as he drove back through the outskirts of Clearwater, headlights cutting through the dust, William glanced at the horizon. Beyond the dark silhouette of trees, he could see the faint outline of his old farm, Carter Fields, swallowed by weeds and silence. In the truck's glove compartment, the photo of his father slipped out again. He looked at it for a long time, then whispered, "I'm not done yet." The truck rolled on, fading into the night, one man against an entire town that had already decided who he was. The following morning, the air in Clearwater felt heavy, not from heat, but from talk. News traveled fast in small towns, especially when it carried a hint of ridicule. At Harper's Diner, the kind of place where gossip was served with breakfast, William sat alone at a corner booth. His coffee had gone cold long before anyone dared speak to him. He could feel the stares, sideways, cautious, amused. At the counter, two men whispered loud enough to be heard. "Did you see him at the market yesterday? Poor guy still thinks that farm means something. Yeah, maybe he'll sell what's left of it for scrap metal." Laughter, quick and sharp, filled the air. The waitress, Lucy, an older woman with kind eyes, approached quietly. "Refill, Mr. Carter?" He nodded. "Thanks, Lucy." She poured the coffee and leaned closer. "You shouldn't pay attention to them. They forget who built this town." William looked out the window. Across the street, a new billboard gleamed in the sun. "Coming soon. Carter Ridge Estates. Luxury. Living in the heart of Texas." The irony stung. His name, the one his father had carried with pride, now turned into a brand. He took a slow sip of coffee, then whispered, "They remember the name, just not the man." Lucy hesitated before speaking. "You could still fight for it, Will. You always had that spark." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes, Lucy, people mistake silence for surrender." Later that day, William drove out toward the old Clearwater Co-op, a large warehouse now converted into an office for Lone Star Developments, the company buying up farmland. He parked by the gate and watched workers load new construction equipment onto trailers. The place smelled of asphalt and diesel, the scent of a world that no longer needed men like him. Inside, at the reception desk, a young woman barely looked up from her computer. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm here to see whoever's in charge of the Carter Fields project," he said calmly. "That would be Mr. Bryant. Do you have an appointment?" "No," William said, "but he'll want to see me." Moments later, Greg Bryant appeared. Slick suit, confident stride, phone glued to his ear. He ended his call with a rehearsed smile. "William Carter, right? I heard you were back. Thought you'd given up on this place." "Just wanted to see what kind of men buy dreams they didn't build," William replied. Bryant chuckled, leaning against the counter. "That's business, my friend. You had your time. The world moves on." "Maybe," William said, "but the soil doesn't forget who planted it." Bryant smirked. "Poetic. You always were the sentimental type. Listen, the auction's happening Friday. You're welcome to come watch. If you can handle seeing someone else raise your flag." William's jaw tightened, but his tone stayed even. "Good luck building on ground that still remembers me." As he turned to leave, Bryant called after him, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Hey, Will, maybe bring your checkbook next time. Oh, wait, you'd need money for that." Laughter erupted from the nearby desks. William didn't look back. He just pushed open the door and stepped into the glare of the Texas sun. Outside, he sat in his truck for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. Through the windshield, the reflection of the new development shimmered, glass and metal replacing grass and memory. He started the engine, but before driving off, his gaze caught something in the rearview mirror. A small boy, no older than 10, watching from behind the fence. The kid held a worn-out baseball glove, curiosity shining in his eyes. William smiled softly and rolled down his window. "You play ball, son?" The boy nodded shyly. "Yeah, my dad works here." "Then tell your dad," William said kindly, "to take care of that field. It used to grow more than houses." The boy frowned, confused, but smiled back. As William drove away, the boy kept watching, as if he somehow knew the old man's story wasn't over. Back home, the sun was setting over the horizon. The fields glowed gold, a final salute from the land he once owned. He sat on the porch, the photograph of his father resting on his knee. The words on the back seemed to whisper again, "Never let pride blind your purpose." He whispered, "Maybe pride's all I got left, Dad." Then, almost on cue, the phone rang inside. He hesitated before answering. "Mr. Carter," a woman's voice said, "this is Rebecca Lane. I might have something for you, a way to fight back, but you'll need to move fast." William straightened, the fatigue in his face replaced by a spark. "I'm listening." That evening, William met Rebecca Lane behind the old grain elevator at the edge of town, a place that still smelled like work, not perfume. She was leaning on her SUV, clipboard in hand, when his pickup pulled up, headlights slicing through the dusk. "Thanks for coming," she said as he stepped out. "Didn't have anywhere better to be," he replied. adjusting his hat. Rebecca handed him a folder. These are soil reports from Carter Fields. The new developers think the ground is useless, too dry, too alkaline. But I know that's not true. You managed to grow crops there for 20 years. William opened the folder, scanning the numbers under the dim light. He nodded slowly. They're testing it wrong, he murmured. That land breathes differently. It needs to rest between crops, not drown in irrigation. Rebecca smiled faintly. That's what I thought you'd say. She pulled out another sheet, a notice from the county's agricultural board. If you can prove that land still has potential, with live results, the bank can't finalize the sale until it's reassessed. You'd have a window, maybe 48 hours. William's eyes lifted. You're telling me there's still a way to stop this? She nodded. A small one, but you'd have to show results fast. He looked toward the horizon where his old farm slept under the night sky. Then I'd better get my hands dirty. By dawn, William was back at Carter Fields. The gates were chained, but the fence had weak spots, spots only the man who built them would know. He slipped through quietly, boots sinking into the dry soil. The land was silent, almost resentful, like it had forgotten how to be alive. He knelt, scooping a handful of dirt, rubbing it between his fingers. Still breathing, he said to himself, just needs someone to listen. He grabbed tools from the truck, a rusted tiller, a few hoses, and a bucket of seed he'd kept since the last harvest years ago. One by one, he started working the earth. Each movement was deliberate, slow but precise, like a craftsman fixing an old clock. Midday heat beat down as a car stopped by the road. It was Brian, one of the young developers, watching in disbelief. He stepped out, sunglasses gleaming. "What the hell are you doing, old man? That's private property." William straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Just borrowing what's mine for one more day." Brian laughed. "You think playing farmer's gonna change anything? The bank's already signed off. That dirt's dead." William looked at him steadily. "Dead things don't fight back." Brian smirked. "You're out of your mind." "Maybe. But this land's the only thing that still remembers me, so I owe it one last try." Brian shook his head, still amused. "Knock yourself out, Grandpa. I'll enjoy watching you fail." He drove off, tires spitting dust across the field. By nightfall, the sound of an engine echoed from the barn, the old blue tractor. William had spent hours repairing it, patching wires, cleaning spark plugs, whispering to it like an old friend. He turned the key again. The motor coughed, rattled, then roared to life. The barn filled with light. Dust danced through the air like memory. William laughed, the first real laugh in years. "Still got it, huh?" he said, patting the hood. "Guess we both ain't done yet." He drove through the field, tilling rows into the earth under the glow of the tractor's headlights. Each line was straight, disciplined, proof of a lifetime's knowledge etched into his muscles. Gee, it's by sunrise. Rebecca arrived, eyes wide, as she stepped out of her car. The land looked alive again, dark, moist soil, lined in perfect symmetry. "You did all this in one night?" she asked. "Didn't need sleep," he said, "just purpose." She knelt, picking up a handful of soil. "It's rich again. How did you—" "Old trick my father taught me," William said. "The ground only listens to those who respect it." He wiped his hands on his jeans, exhaustion in every breath, but there was light in his eyes again. Rebecca smiled. "This might actually work, Will." He looked out across the field, the sun rising over the furrows. "For the first time in a long while, I think I might too." Meanwhile, back at the Lone Star Development's office, Brian stormed in, tossing his keys on the desk. "You're not going to believe this," he said to Greg Bryant. "The old man's out there working the field like it's 1985. Bryant frowned. "Let him. A photo op of a dusty relic won't stop progress." But Brian hesitated. "He made the field look different, like it's breathing again." Bryant laughed. "Then let him dream. By Friday it's ours. You'll see." Brian didn't reply. For the first time, doubt had crept into his voice. "Beej." The next morning, Clearwater woke to something it hadn't seen in years, a shimmer of green across the Carter Fields. The sun rose over the hills, revealing small sprouts breaking through the soil, fragile but alive. At the diner, the usual hum of gossip took a different tone. Lucy poured coffee for a customer and nodded toward the window. "Looks like the old man's farm is waking up." The men who once laughed now hesitated before speaking. One of them muttered, "I drove by there last night. It didn't look dead anymore." The other shrugged, pretending not to care. Probably a trick of the light. But people started driving by. Curiosity always finds a road. William was already on the field when the first cars stopped by the fence. He ignored them, focused on the rhythm of his work, slow, patient, deliberate. The tractor groaned and rattled as it crossed the rows, each turn a reminder that skill doesn't fade with time, only practice. Rebecca arrived mid-morning, waving from the gate. "You're trending, Will," she said, half-joking. "Half the town's talking about you." He smiled faintly. "They were talking before, too, just louder." She laughed. "You know, that sarcasm might scare the reporters." "Reporters?" William asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah," she said, holding up her phone. "Local station picked it up. Old farmer fights back against developers. They'll be here by noon." William looked at the field, then at her. "I didn't do this to make the news." "I know," Rebecca replied. "That's what makes it newsworthy." By noon, a small crowd had gathered. Neighbors, workers, even a few students stood at the fence, watching as William worked the soil. The sound of the tractor filled the air like an old song the town had forgotten the lyrics to. A young reporter approached with a camera crew. "Mr. Carter, we heard you're trying to reclaim your family's land. Mind if we ask why?" William stopped the tractor, wiped his face with a rag, and looked straight at the camera. "Because it's not about ownership," he said. "It's about respect for the land, for work, for what came before us. People forget that too easy." The reporter smiled, surprised by the calm conviction in his voice. "And what do you say to those who think your time has passed?" William paused, looking out across the field. "I say time doesn't pass. People just stop paying attention to what matters." It was a simple answer, and that's what made it powerful. And that night, the news clip aired across the county. The image of William standing beside his tractor, dust swirling behind him, filled living rooms and phones. Some laughed. Some felt something they hadn't in years, admiration. At the Copper Mule Tavern, the same men who once mocked him now sat quietly as the footage played on TV. Brian watched too, leaning against the bar, his smirk fading. Greg Bryant clapped him on the shoulder. "Relax," Bryant said. "He's a local hero today, a footnote tomorrow." But Brian wasn't sure. He'd seen the field himself. It wasn't luck. It was mastery. Meanwhile, Rebecca found William still in the barn that night, working under the dim light of a single bulb. He was repairing irrigation lines, hands trembling from exhaustion, but unwilling to stop. "You should rest," she said softly. "Can't. The soil won't wait," he replied, tightening a valve. She watched him for a moment, then said, "You know, the people are starting to believe in you again." William smiled without looking up. "They don't believe in me. They believe in what they've lost." Rebecca tilted her head. "And what's that?" He looked up, eyes shining under the dusty brim of his hat. "Faith, not the church kind, the kind that makes you plant seeds without knowing if they'll grow." Rebecca didn't answer. There was nothing to add. Butterson. By dawn, dew covered the fields like glass. The sprouts had doubled in size overnight. It wasn't enough to save the land yet, but it was proof that what's buried doesn't always stay dead. As William stood watching the sunrise, a convoy of black SUVs appeared on the road, the developers, cameras, and county inspectors arriving to verify what everyone was whispering about. The old man adjusted his hat and whispered to himself, "Let's see if they still think it's just dirt." The convoy rolled to a stop by the edge of Carter Fields. Black SUVs, crisp suits, and polished shoes stepped onto the same dirt that once carried the weight of William's father's boots. Greg Bryant led the group, sunglasses gleaming, his smile sharp as glass. Behind him came Brian, his confidence not quite as solid as before. A county inspector followed, clipboard in hand, and a reporter trailed close, recording every word. "Mr. Carter," Bryant began, his voice oily with charm, "seems like you've drawn quite a crowd. Congratulations on whatever this is." William looked at the man, then at the small green rose stretching across the field. "It's called work." Bryant laughed lightly. "Cute. But let's be honest. This won't change anything. The land's already under our contract." Rebecca stepped in before William could reply. "That contract is pending review. If these soil tests prove productivity, the sale pauses under Section 8B of the County Agriculture Code." Bryant's smile twitched. "And who exactly requested this review?" "I did," Rebecca said, "as an officer of the board." The crowd murmured. Cameras clicked. William said nothing, but his calm presence drew the attention of everyone watching. He didn't need to argue. The rows behind him spoke louder than pride ever could. Then, as if fate wanted to test his resolve, a distant cry broke through the moment. Across the road, smoke began rising from Jensen's barn, an old property neighboring the Carter fields. Screams followed, a woman's voice, panicked and sharp, a child's. Rebecca turned first. "That's Emma Jensen's place." Without hesitation, William dropped his hat, sprinted to his truck, and started the engine. Bryant called out sarcastically, "What's he doing now, playing hero?" But by the time he finished his sentence, William's pickup was already tearing down the dirt road, dust swallowing the laughter behind him. The fire had spread fast. Dry hay and wind made a cruel partnership. The barn crackled and roared like an animal. Emma Jensen was outside, crying, clutching her daughter's arm. "Sam's still inside," she shouted. "My boy, he's inside." William didn't hesitate. He grabbed a wet tarp from the truck, wrapped it around his shoulders, and ran toward the flames. "Will, no!" Rebecca screamed, jumping out of her car, but he was already gone, disappearing into the smoke. Inside, the air was thick and violent. He coughed, eyes burning, calling out through the chaos. "Sam, where are you?" A faint voice answered, a child hiding beneath a collapsed beam. William dropped to his knees, crawled toward the sound, his hands blistering as he lifted debris piece by piece. He found the boy, face streaked with soot and tears. "It's okay, son. You're coming with me." He pulled the child into his arms and forced his way toward the doorway. The roof groaned above them, threatening to collapse. Just before it gave way, William dove through the smoke, the two of them crashing onto the dirt outside as the barn collapsed behind them. The crowd that had gathered, workers, neighbors, even Bryant, watched in stunned silence as he rolled over, coughing, the boy safe in his arms. Rebecca ran to him, eyes wet. "Will, are you okay?" He nodded weakly. "The kid's fine. That's what matters." The boy clung to him, whispering, "Thank you, sir." William looked down at the child and smiled through the soot. "You remind me of someone I used to be." News of the rescue spread faster than the fire itself. By sundown, the story was everywhere. The same reporters who had mocked him now spoke his name with reverence. Headline, "Old Farmer Saves Child from Blaze," a town's respect rekindled. At the diner, Lucy wiped tears from her eyes as she watched the report. At the bar, men who once laughed at him sat quietly ashamed, and at the development office, Greg Bryant stared at the screen, jaw tight, realizing the narrative had slipped from his control. "Great," he muttered. "Now, he's a hero." Bryant didn't respond. Something in his expression had changed, the arrogance replaced by uneasy respect. He finally said, "Maybe he always was." That night, William sat on the porch of the Jensen house, his arm wrapped in bandages. Rebecca stood beside him, handing him a cup of water. "Doctors say the boy's gonna be fine. You probably saved his life." William shook his head. "Didn't save him. The land did." Rebecca frowned. "The land?" He nodded, looking out toward Carter Fields, glowing faintly under the moon. "That dirt taught me something today. If something's still breathing, you don't walk away from it." She smiled softly. "You really believe that, don't you?" "Every word," he said. "And maybe that's why I came back. Not to win, but to make things right. The day after the fire, Clearwater felt different. For the first time in years, people spoke William Carter's name with respect, not as a punchline, but as a measure of courage. But fate doesn't hand out peace without testing its worth. The county board had confirmed that a new inspection would decide whether Carter Fields could be exempt from the sale. If the land showed sustainable productivity and healthy soil, William would win more than his property back. He'd win his legacy. If not, everything he'd fought for, every blister, every sleepless night, would disappear in a single stroke of a pen. The test was set for Friday morning. On Thursday night, the storm came. Rain hammered the roofs of Clearwater like a verdict. Lightning tore the sky in half, and the Carter Fields, the fragile sprouts that had just begun to live, shivered under the weight of water and wind. William stood in the barn doorway, coat soaked, watching the storm chew through his work. Rebecca arrived minutes later, headlights slicing the downpour. "You can't go out there," she shouted as he grabbed his tools. "I can't watch it die again," he yelled back, stepping into the rain. The tractor lights cut across the field as he tried to save the irrigation lines. Mud sucked at his boots, water poured down his face. He worked blindly, fixing what he could, holding the hoses in place with makeshift stakes. The soil was flooding. The same land that had just started to breathe again was drowning before his eyes. Rebecca followed him, clutching a flashlight. "Will, stop. You'll make it worse." He turned to her, voice breaking. "I can't. If it goes under tonight, the test tomorrow means nothing." She stepped closer, gripping his arm. "You've already proven enough. You don't have to destroy yourself to prove it again." William looked at her, his face a mix of exhaustion and defiance. "Rebecca, men like me don't get to stop when it's enough. We stop when it's right." By dawn, the storm passed. The fields were a mess. Puddles of brown water, rows torn apart, some sprouts gone completely. William fell to his knees, hands in the mud, silent. Rebecca knelt beside him. "I'm sorry." He looked up, eyes hollow but steady. "It's not over yet." At 9 a.m. the county trucks arrived. Inspectors, the bank representative, and of course Greg Bryant, smiling like a man about to collect what he thinks is his. "Rough night, huh?" Bryant said, stepping out of his SUV. "Guess Mother Nature has better taste in developers." William didn't answer. He just stood beside the tractor, hands caked in dirt, watching the officials walk the land. The lead inspector bent down, checking the soil, taking samples. Rebecca held her breath beside William. Bryant folded his arms. "Face it, old man. You can't fight time. You can't fight the future." William turned to him, voice low but clear. "I'm not fighting the future. I'm fighting the idea that it belongs to people who stopped earning it." Bryant opened his mouth to respond, but the inspector spoke first. "Wait, these roots survived the flood." Everyone turned. He pointed to one section, the lowest part of the field, where water had pooled deepest. There, the sprouts stood upright, vivid green against the mud. Rebecca's eyes widened. "You reinforced the drainage, didn't you?" William nodded slowly. "The soil needed channels. I built them overnight. The rain did the rest." The inspector straightened. "The drainage system's holding. This is textbook hydrologic recovery. I haven't seen something like this in years." Rebecca smiled, tears forming. Bryant's grin faltered. "That doesn't mean anything. The yield still—" "It means," the inspector interrupted, "that the field is self-sustaining. The reassessment will delay the sale indefinitely." The crowd murmured. Reporters wrote, cameras clicked. But William didn't move. He just looked out over the wet, glistening earth, the same soil that had broken him, now lifting him back up. When the officials left, Rebecca touched his shoulder gently. "You did it." William smiled weakly. "No, the land did. I just listened." She chuckled softly. "You're impossible, you know that." "Stubborn's the word," he said, finally laughing, a sound that felt like sunlight after years of rain. But his laughter faded as he looked toward the horizon. Down the road, Bryant's SUV waited. The man stood beside it, staring back, not with hatred this time, but something colder. Calculation. This wasn't over. Of that night, the town slept under the hum of cicadas and the smell of wet earth. But William didn't. He sat alone in the barn, the light of a single lantern trembling across his face. Mud still clung to his boots, and the sound of the tractor's cooling engine ticked like a clock he couldn't turn off. On the workbench lay a small metal box, dented, rusted, and locked. He turned it over in his hands before pulling out a key tied to a leather string around his neck. Inside were only a few things: a wedding ring, a folded letter, and a newspaper clipping yellowed by time. He opened the letter first. The handwriting was soft, looping. Emily Carter, his late wife. "You always said the land was your voice, Will. Don't let anyone silence it. I'll be proud no matter how it ends." He read the words over and over, lips trembling. It had been 5 years since the accident. 5 years since the night that ended everything he'd built. The flashback came like lightning. A different storm. A younger William in the same field, soaked, desperate, trying to save the harvest. Emily had begged him to come inside. "Please, Will. The soil can wait. The road's flooding." He had ignored her. Duty before safety. That was his creed. Minutes later, her truck was swept off the bridge on her way to find him. When they pulled her body from the river, he didn't cry. He just stood there, covered in mud, realizing that pride had stolen the only thing that truly mattered. Back in the present, William held the ring tightly in his palm. Rebecca's voice broke the silence from behind him. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said softly. She had come to check on him, standing by the barn door. He didn't turn. "You ever make a mistake so big the world stops talking, and you start wishing it would never start again?" he asked. Rebecca stepped closer. "I think everyone carries something they can't bury. The difference is whether you let it rot you or feed something new." William smiled faintly. "I buried her here, by the oak. She loved that tree." Rebecca looked toward the hill outside, where the oak stood like a guardian. "I didn't know," she whispered. He nodded. "Nobody does. I left after the funeral. Couldn't stand the silence. Sold half the land to a man I trusted. Thought he'd take care of it. Turned out he just sold it to the next bidder." "That man was Bryant, wasn't it?" she asked. William's silence was answer enough. Rebecca sat beside him on the workbench. "Then this isn't just about the farm," he shook his head. "No, it's about finishing what I didn't understand before. The land doesn't belong to us. We belong to it. And maybe forgiveness works the same way. It waits until we're ready to work it." She looked at him, eyes soft. "You think she'd forgive you?" William stared at the photo on the wall, Emily's smile framed by summer light. "She already did. I'm just trying to earn it." De Kille Büstes outside, the wind rose again, rustling the leaves of the oak tree. William walked out, lantern in hand, crossing the damp grass. He stopped before the small wooden cross beneath the tree. The rain had worn it smooth, but her name was still carved there. He placed the ring in the soil and whispered, "I finally listened." Rebecca stood back, watching silently, tears on her cheeks. When William returned, his face looked different. Not lighter, but grounded. The kind of calm that only comes when a man stops running from his ghosts. He looked at Rebecca. "Tomorrow we start early. The soil's ready for the next cycle." She smiled, nodding. "And you?" He looked toward the horizon, where the first line of dawn began to bleed through the night. "I think I am too." "Did you see?" Meanwhile, in the dark of his office downtown, Greg Bryant watched the news replay on his phone. The camera showed William in the field, Rebecca beside him, the green rose stretching like a miracle. Bryant poured a drink and muttered, "So that's your story now. Redemption." He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "Let's see how the town feels when they find out what really happened to that bridge." He opened a drawer, pulling out an old folder stamped with the County Infrastructure Department seal. Inside, a photo, a collapsed wooden bridge, the same one that had taken Emily Carter's life. Bryant smirked. Time to change the narrative. The morning crept into Clearwater with a hesitant light. Dew shimmered over the Carter fields, and for once the town seemed to hold its breath. William stood by the fence line, arms crossed, the weight of everything he'd confessed the night before pressing behind his ribs. The air smelled of soil and smoke, a mix of rebirth and warning. Rebecca pulled up in her SUV, window rolled down. "You didn't sleep, did you?" He shook his head. "The land's awake. I figured I should be too." Before she could answer, another truck approached. Silver, spotless. The kind city men drove when they wanted to look country. Brian stepped out, hat in hand. William stiffened. "Come to finish what your boss started?" Brian hesitated, his voice quieter than usual. "No, sir. I came to say I'm sorry." Rebecca folded her arms. "For which part? Mocking him or trying to steal his life's work?" Brian met William's eyes. "Both. I didn't know about the bridge, about your wife, Bryant spreading things around town, saying it was your fault, that you ignored warnings, that you got her killed." William's jaw tightened. "Let him talk. Truth don't need marketing." Brian stepped closer. "I used to believe men like him were untouchable, but yesterday when you saved that kid, I realized I've been working for the wrong side." He held out a folder. "These are the county maintenance records Bryant's been hiding. The bridge wasn't inspected for 3 years before the collapse. He was in charge of the budget then." Rebecca's eyes widened. "You're sure?" Brian nodded. "Positive. He covered it up, blamed you in his reports." William took the folder, silent. The papers trembled slightly in his hands, not from fear, but from the quiet rage of a man who finally sees the shape of the knife that cut him. They sat inside the barn while rain began again, softer this time. Rebecca spread the documents across a table. "Will, this could clear your name. Maybe even take Bryant down." He stared at the pages, unmoving. "Clearing my name won't bring her back." Brian leaned forward. "Maybe not, but it'll stop him from destroying anyone else's." William looked up. The young man's voice carried something he hadn't heard from him before. Respect. "What's in it for you?" Brian shrugged. "Maybe a little redemption of my own. I grew up here too. My dad lost his farm to the same kind of men I work for. Guess I forgot that." The silence that followed was heavy but clean, like the air after thunder. Rebecca spoke softly. "We can bring this to the county attorney. Bryant's influence stops at the boardroom door, but we'll need proof the documents are real." Brian nodded. "I can testify. I was the one who helped digitize the old files." William closed the folder slowly. "Then I guess we're partners now." Brian smiled faintly. "Never thought I'd hear that." "Me neither," William said. "But life's got a way of rewriting the script when you think it's over." That afternoon, they drove into town together. People turned to watch as the old pickup and the new truck rolled side by side down Main Street, a sight no one in Clearwater could have imagined a week ago. They stopped at the county courthouse, an old stone building that smelled of coffee and dust. Inside, Rebecca led the way to the office of District Attorney Karen Mills, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a sharper sense of justice. After hearing their story, she read through the documents silently, flipping pages with precision. When she finished, she looked up. "If this is authentic, Bryant's finished. Fraud, negligence, falsification of records. He'll lose his contracts and his license." Brian swallowed. "He'll come after us before that." She nodded. "Then you'd better be ready." William stood. "I've been ready for 5 years." That evening, back at the farm, William walked the fields as the sun fell behind the trees. The soil was dark again, strong, breathing. He thought about Emily's letter, about the words that had haunted him. "Don't let anyone silence the land." Rebecca joined him, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You really think you can beat him?" William smiled softly. "I don't need to beat him. I just need the truth to stand longer than his lies." She looked toward the fading light. "Then we'll make sure it does." Brian's truck appeared in the distance, headlights flashing once in silent agreement. For the first time, William didn't feel alone in the fight. He looked up at the sky, the clouds opening like a promise. Sometimes help doesn't come from angels. It comes from the people who finally remember where they came from. Friday arrived like a hammer. The sun barely rose before the courthouse square filled with murmurs. Reporters set up tripods. Townspeople crowded the steps. The public hearing to determine the fate of Carter Fields had begun. Inside, the air was tense. At one table sat William, Rebecca, and Brian, the unlikely trio. Across from them, Greg Bryant, surrounded by lawyers, smug as ever. The county board members shuffled papers, glancing between both sides. At the center sat District Attorney Karen Mills, overseeing the proceedings. "Mr. Bryant," she said, "you've filed a motion claiming Mr. Carter falsified environmental data to delay your development project." Bryant adjusted his tie. "That's correct. The old man manipulated the results to stall progress." A ripple of whispers moved through the room. Rebecca's jaw tightened, but William stayed calm, still, silent, and watchful. Karen turned. "Mr. Carter, your response?" William stood slowly, hat in hand. "Ma'am, I didn't falsify anything. The land speaks for itself. You just have to know how to listen." The board members exchanged glances. Bryant smirked. "Poetry's cute, Will, but numbers don't lie." William nodded. "No, they don't. Which is why I brought mine." He motioned to Brian, who rolled out a large map, the irrigation and drainage redesign William had drawn by hand after the storm. Rebecca placed printed soil analyses beside it. "These tests," she said, "were run independently by the state lab yesterday. They show the nutrient levels doubled in 72 hours. Impossible without natural filtration." Bryant scoffed. "Coincidence? The rain did that." William turned to him. "Rain destroys when it's uncontrolled. But with the right channels, it restores." He pointed to the sketch. "I redirected the runoff through retention furrows, the same method my father used 50 years ago. It keeps the water moving just slow enough to breathe through the soil. That's what saved the roots." Rebecca looked around the room. "It's sustainable farming, not luck. And it's why this land still stands while others eroded." The inspector from earlier, the same man who had doubted William, spoke up. "She's right. I reviewed the field myself. It's a model of efficient recovery." The crowd murmured again, the tone shifting this time. Bryant's face hardened. He slammed a folder onto the table. "He's still hiding something. Tell them, Carter, about the bridge, about your wife." A hush fell over the room. William closed his eyes for a moment, breathing through the pain that name carried. When he opened them, there was no anger, only truth. "My wife died trying to find me," he said quietly. "That's something I'll carry until the earth takes me too. But she didn't die because of me. She died because that bridge was never repaired." He turned toward Karen and handed her the folder Brian had given him days earlier. "These are the maintenance records from the year of the collapse. The signatures, the budget approvals, all under Greg Bryant's supervision." Karen scanned the papers, her face tightening with every page. She looked up slowly. "Mr. Bryant, is this your handwriting?" Silence. "Answer the question." Bryant hesitated. "Those documents are outdated." "No," Karen said sharply. "They're evidence, fraud, negligence, and cover-up." Gasps filled the courtroom. Bryant's lawyers whispered frantically, but the damage was done. Rebecca leaned toward William, whispering, "You did it!" He shook his head. "No, the truth did." "Ndrei di system." As the board conferred, thunder rolled in the distance, soft, echoing through the courthouse windows. It was the same sound that had haunted him for years, now returning not as punishment, but as release. Finally, Karen spoke. "After review of the evidence and witness testimony, the county hereby nullifies the sale of Carter Fields. The property remains under Mr. Carter's ownership. Further investigation will be opened regarding Mr. Bryant's conduct." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then rising like a tide. William stood still, eyes closed, letting the sound wash through him. Bryant gathered his papers, fury burning behind his forced smile. "This isn't over, old man," he hissed. William turned to him calmly. "It is for me. You'll still have to live with yourself. That's punishment enough." Outside, the rain began again, light, cleansing. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps, calling William's name. He raised a hand, stopping them. "I don't want fame. I just want people to remember one thing," he said. "Everything you build, whether it's land or legacy, must start with respect. Without it, even gold turns to dust." Cameras flashed, but behind every lens, even those who once mocked him saw something they couldn't name: dignity. Rebecca walked beside him as they left the courthouse. "So what now?" she asked. William smiled softly. "Now we rebuild the right way." By evening, Clearwater was celebrating. Cars honked as they passed Carter Fields, and the diner had a "Free Pie for Mr. Carter" sign taped to its window. People waved when William drove by, and for the first time in years, his name wasn't whispered. It was spoken with pride. But inside, something in him remained still. Victory felt heavy, not bright. The kind of win that doesn't erase what it cost. He parked his truck by the fence line, engine ticking softly in the dusk. The field glowed faintly under the last light, the sprouts bending gently in the breeze. Everything he fought for was right there, and yet it didn't feel like his anymore. Rebecca walked up, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You disappeared fast. You should have stayed. They wanted pictures." "I've had enough pictures," he said, smiling faintly. "You know," she said, "you just saved an entire piece of this town. That's something." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, but saving the land doesn't save the years I lost." Rebecca hesitated, her voice gentler now. "You can't live there, Will, in that place where everything hurt." He looked down at his hands, cracked, blistered, still trembling from the weeks of work. "These hands don't know anything else." The celebration sounds drifted faintly from town. Laughter, music, the buzz of a reborn community. But on the outskirts, the quiet returned. William stepped into the barn. The lamp still burned on the workbench, casting its soft circle of light on Emily's photo and the old tools beside it. He sat down slowly, the exhaustion settling deep. That's when he noticed something strange, the faint hum of the irrigation pumps. They were running. He hadn't turned them on. He frowned, grabbed his flashlight, and walked out toward the field. The sound grew louder, mechanical, off rhythm. When he reached the main valve, he froze. The control lever was broken, twisted open. Water poured unchecked into the lower rows, flooding them. He ran to shut the secondary line, but it had been tampered with, cut clean through. A chill ran through him. Someone had done this on purpose. He sprinted back toward the barn, yelling for Rebecca. She was already on the porch, phone in hand. Brian just called. The sheriff's station caught fire downtown. Files, computers, everything. Bryant's gone. William stopped dead. Gone! Left town an hour ago. He torched everything on his way out. William turned toward the fields, the rising flood glistening under the moonlight. Then he didn't leave empty-handed. They worked through the night, trying to control the damage. Rebecca held the flashlight while William wrestled with the main valve, wrench slipping in the mud. "Will, stop! You'll break your arm!" "I'm not letting him win again!" he shouted. The pipe gave way with a crack, spraying water across his face. He fell to his knees, coughing, soaked and shivering. Rebecca knelt beside him, gripping his shoulders. "It's just land, Will." He looked at her, eyes burning with something deeper than anger. "It's not just land. It's every mistake I made trying to hold on to what I loved. Every time I thought I could control what was already gone." He buried his face in his hands, mud streaking down his arms. For the first time since the accident, he let himself cry. Not the quiet kind, the kind that rips through a man like confession. Rebecca stayed beside him, saying nothing. Sometimes words ruin the sacredness of grief. By dawn, the pumps were off. Half the field was ruined, the rest barely standing. The storm in his chest had finally calmed, leaving only silence. Rebecca sat on the fence, watching the pink edge of morning break. "You still have the upper rows," she said softly. "They'll survive." He nodded, voice low. "Maybe that's all anything does, survive." She handed him his hat. "You did what no one else would have had the heart to do. That's more than survival." He looked at her, then at the horizon, where the sun was rising behind the oak tree. Its branches swayed like a promise, bruised but unbroken. Gee. Back in town, the news had spread. Bryant had vanished, the sheriff's office in ruins, and Carter Fields partially destroyed by sabotage. The town buzzed with outrage, petitions, and police talk. But William didn't go to town that day. He stayed on his land, shovel in hand, quietly rebuilding what had been torn. Rebecca found him there hours later, sweat soaking his shirt. "You don't stop, do you?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "If the roots hold, you plant again. That's the rule." She laughed softly. "You sound like your father." He looked toward the old oak and whispered, "I hope so." 3 days passed. The air over Clearwater had changed again. Softer, slower. The rage that once filled the town had turned into something else. Resolve. Volunteers showed up at Carter Fields without being asked. Men who once mocked William brought tools. Women brought food and coffee. Children ran between the rows, laughing as they helped replant seedlings that hadn't drowned. William stood at the edge of the field, watching in quiet disbelief. He hadn't asked for help, and yet, here they were. Dozens of people, bending over the soil like a living apology. Rebecca walked up beside him, brushing dust off her jeans. "Guess the town finally remembered who it belongs to." He nodded. "I don't think it belongs to anyone. I think it just lets us stay a while." She smiled. "That's the kind of line that ends up carved in a courthouse wall someday." William chuckled. "Let's hope they spell it right." By noon, the sound of engines filled the distance. Trucks carrying fresh supplies from neighboring farms pulled in. One bore a hand-painted sign, "Carter Fields, the heart of Clearwater." Brian climbed down from the lead truck, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Hope you don't mind the reinforcements," he said. "Half these folks called me this morning asking how they could help." William smiled, genuinely this time. "Looks like you finally picked the right side." Brian nodded. "Feels better than the other one." He paused, glancing toward the field. "You know this place. It's more than land now. It's a lesson." William looked at him. "Lessons don't mean much unless they change people." Brian extended his hand. "Then let's make sure it does." William took it. Firm, steady, clean of bitterness. As the days passed, Carter Fields began to heal again. The smell of wet earth returned, rich and alive. The furrows William had carved during the storm now worked perfectly, channels of life instead of ruin. Every sunrise brought more hands, more laughter, more hope. The local paper called it the Carter Miracle, but to William, it wasn't a miracle at all. It was mercy. Mercy for a man who had finally stopped fighting the world long enough to listen to it. One afternoon, Rebecca found him sitting by the oak tree, wiping sweat from his brow. She sat beside him, silent for a moment. The wind rustled through the branches like the voice of something eternal. "You ever think she'd be proud of you?" she asked gently. William stared at the horizon. "I don't think pride's the right word. Maybe relieved. She used to tell me the land would teach me humility if I stopped trying to own it." Rebecca smiled. "Looks like it finally did." He laughed softly. "Yeah, took long enough." They sat quietly as the golden light spread across the field, turning the rows into waves of amber. "Rebecca," he said after a while, "when all this started, I thought the world took everything from me. But maybe it was just giving me the time to understand what enough means." She looked at him. "And what does it mean?" He thought for a moment, then said, "It's when what you have and what you lost finally make peace." That evening, the townspeople gathered in the barn for a community dinner. Long tables, old guitars, laughter that carried through the night. Lucy brought pies. The Jensen family brought flowers. The little boy William had saved ran up and handed him a small drawing. A man standing in a field, holding hands with someone in the clouds. "Mom said that's your wife watching you," the boy said shyly. William knelt, smiling through tears. "Then tell your mum she's probably right." Later, when everyone had gone, he stood alone beneath the oak tree once more. The moonlight spilled across the field like silver dust. He took off his hat, closed his eyes and whispered, Emily, the land's breathing again. The wind blew softly, brushing against his face like a hand he'd known all his life. He looked toward the horizon, where the first fireflies blinked in the dark, and for the first time in years, his heart was quiet. No guilt, no pride, just peace. At dawn, he wrote a small sign and placed it at the entrance of the farm. Carter Fields, rebuilt by Clearwater. Planted by hope. He smiled at the words, wiped his hands, and walked back to the porch. Rebecca's voice called from behind him. "You ready for the next season?" He turned, smiling. "I think I've already started it." A month later, the sky above Clearwater glowed with the brightness of early summer. Where cracked soil and silence once ruled, life had taken over. The green shimmer of new crops stretched across the horizon like an exhale of the earth itself. The story of Carter Fields had spread far beyond the county lines. News vans came and went. Documentary filmmakers arrived, curious about the man who rebuilt a farm and a community with nothing but grit and humility. William didn't give many interviews. He preferred the dirt under his fingernails to microphones. But one morning, Channel 7 News asked for one final statement. Not about the scandal, not about Bryant, but about what came after. He stood in front of the camera, wearing his old hat, the wind brushing through the corn behind him. The reporter asked, "Mr. Carter, what do you want people to remember from all this?" He thought for a long moment before answering, "That you can lose everything that makes you proud, and still keep what makes you human. And if you take care of the land, or whatever you've been given, it'll take care of you when the world forgets your name." The reporter lowered her microphone, visibly moved. "Do you believe people can still change even after losing everything?" He smiled softly. "I don't think change is something you do. I think it's something you stop fighting." The footage aired that night. Not just in Texas, but across several states, in classrooms, churches, and small towns that looked just like Clearwater. The next week, letters started arriving at William's doorstep. Handwritten envelopes from people he had never met. Farmers, single mothers, veterans, teachers, all saying the same thing in different words. "Thank you for reminding us what matters." He didn't know what to do with them, so Rebecca helped him pin the first 100 to the barn wall. By the end of the month, there were hundreds more, fluttering in the breeze like prayer flags. Clearwater, once a sleepy town divided by ego and money, had changed too. The board voted to preserve Carter Fields as a community heritage site. Local schools began visiting for field lessons about sustainable farming and ethics. And in the center of town, a new plaque was placed beside the courthouse fountain to William Carter, who taught us that dignity grows best in honest soil. William didn't attend the ceremony. Instead, he sat under the oak tree, the sound of distant applause drifting like wind through the fields. He didn't need to be there. The land already knew. Rebecca found him later, carrying a folded newspaper. "They're calling it the Carter model," she said with a grin. "Universities are studying your irrigation method." He chuckled. "Guess old tricks finally caught up with new names." She sat beside him. "They also want to name a grant after you, for small-town restoration projects." He raised an eyebrow. "A grant?" "Yep, the Carter Renewal Fund. You'll help farmers across the state rebuild just like you did here." William looked out over the horizon, the endless, forgiving horizon. "That's not mine," he said. "It's theirs. Everyone who showed up when they didn't have to." Rebecca smiled. "Still humble, still learning," he corrected. That night, the townspeople gathered again, this time not to save something, but to celebrate it. The barn lights glowed like stars, and the laughter was lighter, freer. Lucy stood by the dessert table, telling everyone she'd known this old mule would make it all along. Brian, now working with the new cooperative, raised a toast. "To the man who showed us that roots aren't weakness. They're proof we belong somewhere." Applause filled the air, echoing out over the fields. Rebecca looked across the room, found William leaning by the door, smiling quietly. He didn't raise his glass, he just nodded, as if saying thank you was a language the land had already taught him. day later, when the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, William stepped outside. The field swayed in the warm breeze, alive and full again. He whispered to the darkness, "Guess we did all right, Dad." The old oak stood silent, proud, the moonlight tracing its branches like silver veins, and for a fleeting moment he could almost hear another voice, soft, familiar, laughing the way Emily used to laugh when she caught him talking to the wind. He smiled. "Yeah," he murmured, "I know. Time to rest." The morning came soft and golden. Clearwater had never looked more alive. Children's laughter echoed through the fields where silence once lived, and the sound of shovels and engines had replaced the noise of gossip. At the edge of Carter Fields stood a new wooden sign, freshly painted. Carter Agricultural Learning Center, a place to grow and begin again. The idea had been Rebecca's, but the heart of it belonged to William. The center wasn't built to make profit. It was built to give back, a place where anyone who had lost everything could learn how to rebuild from the ground up. Old tools hung on the barn wall like relics, but every week new hands picked them up. Single parents, veterans, young workers from the city, all came to learn what William had learned the hardest way, that the soil only gives to those who give themselves. Uday! Yesik, the first class began on a Wednesday. William stood before a small crowd, hat in hand, the morning sun behind him. "Most of what I know," he said, "ain't from books. It's from mistakes, expensive ones. But if you leave here remembering one thing, let it be this: nothing is wasted if it taught you something true." He paused, eyes moving over their faces, nervous, hopeful, curious. He saw a younger version of himself in each of them. "When I was your age," he continued, "I thought success was owning more than the next man. Turns out it's just having enough to sleep at night without wondering who you stepped on to get there." A quiet laugh rolled through the group. Even the wind seemed to pause to listen. Rebecca watched from the back, a mix of pride and awe in her eyes. Brian stood beside her, helping with the new irrigation display, the same system that had saved the farm. And Datis Kubki. After the lesson, a young man approached William. His clothes were torn, his hands rough. "Sir, I used to work for Bryant. When the company folded, I lost everything. But watching you, it made me want to start again. I didn't think people like us could." William put a hand on his shoulder. "Son, people like us built this whole damn country. We just forgot our worth." The young man nodded, eyes wet. "Thank you, sir." William smiled. "Don't thank me. Thank the dirt. It's been forgiving fools longer than I've been alive." As months passed, and the learning center flourished, Carter Fields became more than a farm. It became a symbol. The local paper published photos of smiling students, workshops, harvest festivals, and rebuilt barns across nearby towns inspired by the same model. Rebecca handled the administrative side. Brian coordinated partnerships with agricultural schools. And William just kept showing up every morning, same hat, same boots, same quiet purpose. But something deeper had taken root inside him. Peace, not pride. He no longer worked to prove anything. He worked to pass it on. The one evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Rebecca joined him by the oak tree. "You've created something bigger than you," she said. "Do you realize that?" William leaned on his shovel. "Nah, I just gave people a place to belong," she smiled. "That's exactly what I meant." He looked out over the fields, the rows shining gold under the last light. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think the land was my story, but it's really just the paper. We're the ink, and everyone who works it gets to write a line." Rebecca nodded, her eyes glistening. "Then you've written a masterpiece," he laughed. "I've just been rewriting the same chapter until I got it right." A day later that week, the county held a small ceremony. No cameras this time, no speeches for TV, just friends, neighbors, and students gathering to place a plaque at the entrance of the farm. It read, "This land was once lost and found again, not by luck, but by hands that refused to stop working, hearts that refused to stop believing, and faith that even the hardest ground can grow mercy. William didn't speak. He just tipped his hat, eyes on the horizon. Rebecca whispered to him, "You know they'll name this place after you someday." He smiled. They already did. It's written on every callus in this town. That night, under the light of the barn lamps, he sat alone at his workbench. He pulled out Emily's letter one last time. The paper was worn thin, but the ink still held strong. "You always said the land was your voice, Will. Don't let anyone silence it." He placed the letter inside a small glass frame and hung it above the door, right where every student would see it as they walked in. He whispered, "I didn't let it, Em. Not this time." Outside, fireflies danced above the crops like tiny stars, reminders that even in darkness, light finds a way back. 10 years later, the town of Clearwater had changed again, not through investors or corporations, but through people. The Carter Agricultural Learning Center had expanded into a network of small cooperatives across Texas. Old barns were rebuilt. Abandoned fields began to breathe again. And in classrooms, children learned not just how to grow crops, but how to rebuild dignity. At the entrance of the main farm, the old oak tree still stood, older, stronger, its branches stretching wide over the path. Beneath it, a new generation worked the soil, laughing, planting, learning. A young woman walked between the rows, clipboard in hand. Her name was Emma Jensen, the same girl William had carried from the fire years ago. Now grown, she was the new director of the Carter Center. As she approached the barn, she stopped to read the framed letter above the door, the one written by Emily Carter decades before. She touched the glass gently and smiled. "Still here," she whispered. Inside the barn, the smell of earth and engine oil still lingered, a blend of memory and purpose. On the far wall hung a large black-and-white photograph of William Carter, hat in hand, standing by his tractor with a half-smile that said more than words ever could. Below it, a brass plaque read, "He didn't build monuments, he built people." Outside, children ran past, their laughter mixing with the low hum of machinery and the wind moving through the wheat. The land looked endless, as if every ridge and furrow carried a piece of his heartbeat. Emma gathered the students near the oak. "Before we start today," she said, "there's something you all should know. Mr. Carter used to say the land is alive, that it listens, that it remembers. Every time you plant something here, you're adding your voice to a story that never ends." A boy raised his hand. "Did he really say that?" Emma smiled. "He said it every morning and every night." As the class began their planting, an older pickup truck rolled up the hill, one that hadn't been seen in years. Behind the wheel was Brian, grey at the temples now, a small box on the passenger seat. He parked under the oak and waved at Emma. "You sure you want to do this today?" she asked. He nodded. "It's time." He carried the box into the sunlight, opened it carefully, and let the wind catch its contents. Fine ashes that glimmered in the light before disappearing into the soil. Emma placed a hand on his shoulder. "He wanted to come home." Brian smiled faintly. He never left. The ashes drifted across the field, landing softly between the rows of wheat. The wind stilled for a moment, not silence but reverence. Somewhere between the earth and the sky, it felt as if the land itself bowed in gratitude. Later, as the sun set over Clearwater, Emma sat on the porch of the farmhouse, watching the horizon burn gold. She opened a worn leather notebook, William's old field journal, and read the last line he'd written before he passed. "If I ever taught anyone anything, let it be this. Life's not about what you keep. It's about what you leave ready for someone else to finish." She closed the book, smiling through tears. The light faded, but it didn't feel like loss. It felt like continuation. And years later, visitors who came to Clearwater would still hear the locals talk about William Carter. Not as a hero, but as proof that redemption doesn't need applause, just persistence. Some said you could still hear the low rumble of his tractor on quiet nights. Others said the oak grew faster after he was gone. But everyone agreed on one thing. Carter Fields didn't just feed people anymore. It fed faith, the faith that broken things can grow again if someone cares enough to stay and tend the roots. The camera slowly rises above the golden fields, the oak tree at the center. Wind moves through the crops like a whisper. Never let pride blind your purpose. The sky glows crimson as the shot widens, clear water small in the distance, the land stretching endlessly toward the horizon. A quiet, humble voice closes the story. Some destinies aren't written in books or carved in stone. They're planted in soil, in people, in second chances. And if you listen closely enough, you can still hear them growing. Fade out.